The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my dream home, casting warm golden light across the hardwood floors I had worked nearly 12 years to afford. I stood in my kitchen with a cup of coffee, smiling as I looked out at the sprawling backyard. This wasn't just a house. It was proof that every sleepless night, every extra shift, every sacrifice had been worth it. At 31, I had built a successful software consulting business from scratch. I hadn't inherited a penny. My parents had always made it clear that once I turned 18, I was on my own. No college fund. No help with rent. No financial support. When I struggled, they said hardship built character. So I believed them. I worked mornings at a coffee shop, attended classes at night, and taught myself programming during weekends. Years later, after my company landed several major contracts, I finally bought the estate I'd dreamed about. The purchase price was nearly $1.2 million. I personally saved $250,000 for the down payment. Every document, every mortgage payment, every tax bill carried only one name: mine. For almost 2 years, life felt peaceful. Until my younger sister, Brielle, came back into town. Growing up, Brielle had always been the favorite. If she wanted a new car, she got one. If she failed a class, my parents blamed the teachers. If she made terrible decisions, someone else was always responsible. Meanwhile, I was expected to solve every problem on my own. Still, I never hated her. I simply learned not to expect fairness. 3 months after Brielle returned from California, strange things began happening. Mom suddenly wanted family dinners every weekend. Dad called just to check in. They even complimented my success, something they had almost never done before. It felt unusual. One evening over dinner, Mom looked around my dining room. "This house is enormous," she said with a smile. "It must get lonely here." I shrugged. "I lay the space." Dad nodded thoughtfully. "You know, families should help each other." I didn't think much of it, until Brielle casually added, "I've been apartment hunting." I smiled politely. "I hope you find something nice." She sighed dramatically. "The market's impossible." Mom reached over and squeezed her hand. "Don't worry, sweetheart." Then she looked at me. "Your sister needs support." Something about the way she said it made my stomach tighten. I quickly changed the subject. But as they drove away that night, I noticed all 3 of them standing in the driveway talking while glancing back toward my house. For the first time, I felt like they weren't admiring it. They were planning something. Over the next few weeks, the comments became more direct. "You don't really need all those bedrooms. Families should share their blessings. Your sister deserves a fresh start." I laughed them off. Until the Saturday morning that changed everything. I heard the rumble of a large diesel truck outside. Then another. Looking through the front window, my heart nearly stopped. 2 moving trucks were parked in my driveway. Several movers were unloading furniture. My mother stood at the front door holding a spare key she'd secretly kept for years. Beside her stood Brielle, smiling. Mom looked me straight in the eye and calmly said, "Move aside. Brielle is moving in. She needs this estate more than you do." For several long seconds, I simply stared. Surely this had to be some kind of joke. Behind my mother, 2 movers carried a king-sized bed toward my front door. Another team unloaded expensive furniture wrapped in plastic. Brielle stood beside them wearing oversized sunglasses, sipping an iced coffee as though she were arriving at a luxury resort instead of invading someone else's home. I stepped outside. "What is going on?" Mom folded her arms. "You heard me. Brielle is moving in." I looked at the movers. "You can stop unloading." One of them hesitated. "Ma'am, we were hired." "I own this property," I interrupted. "No one is moving anything inside." The movers exchanged nervous glances. Dad climbed out of a black SUV that had just pulled into the driveway. He walked toward me with the confidence of someone convinced he was in charge. "Don't make this difficult." I laughed in disbelief. "Difficult? You've hired movers to take over my house." Dad sighed dramatically. "You've always been selfish." That word hit me harder than I expected. Selfish. I worked for everything I have. I bought this house. I pay the mortgage. I pay the taxes. I pay every single bill. Mom shook her head. "None of that matters." I blinked. "What?" She pointed toward the house. "Family helped raise you. Family encouraged you. Family sacrificed for you. So this is family property." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was unbelievable. "What exactly did you sacrifice?" "When I needed tuition? You said no. When I couldn't pay rent? You said I'd figure it out. When I worked 3 jobs? You never once offered help. Silence. Dad's face hardened. That doesn't change anything. I pulled my phone from my pocket. I'll call the police. Brielle rolled her eyes. Oh please. You're really going to call the cops on your own family? Absolutely. Mom stepped closer. If you do that, don't expect us to ever forgive you. I looked directly into her eyes. I don't remember asking for your forgiveness. She gasped as though I had slapped her. Dad suddenly raised his voice. Fine. If that's how you want to play it. He turned toward the movers. Keep unloading. I stepped directly in front of the doorway. No one enters. One mover quietly asked. Sir, do you actually own this house? Yes. Can you prove it? Without saying another word, I opened my banking app. Then my mortgage account. Then the county property records I'd bookmarked months ago. I handed him the phone. His eyebrows shot upward. The owner listed was unmistakable. My name. Only my name. He looked back at my father. Sir, this property belongs to her. Dad didn't even glance at the screen. It doesn't matter. We're her parents. The mover frowned. It matters to us. If she tells us to stop, we stop. Brielle suddenly exploded. I already packed my apartment. I already told everyone I'm moving here. I stared at her. You announced moving into someone else's house before asking? She crossed her arms. I didn't have to ask. Mom and Dad already promised me. My jaw tightened. They promised you something that wasn't theirs to give. The lead mover slowly removed his work gloves. I'm sorry, folks. We're not touching another box until this gets sorted out. Dad's face turned bright red. I'll sue your company. The mover shrugged. You can try. But we're not participating in trespassing. For a moment, nobody spoke. The only sound was the wind rustling through the oak trees. Then Mom smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was cold. Calculating. You think paperwork makes you the owner? She reached into her purse, pulled out a thick yellow envelope, and waved it in front of my face. It isn't over. We have documents too. She slowly pulled out several papers. Dad grinned. Brielle smiled confidently. My stomach twisted. Had someone forged something? Were they actually about to claim ownership of my house? Before I could read the papers, a sheriff's deputy's patrol SUV slowly turned into my driveway. The sheriff's deputy stepped out of his patrol SUV and adjusted his duty belt before calmly walking toward us. Everyone on the driveway suddenly fell silent. The lead mover immediately approached him. Officer, thanks for coming. We stopped RK because there's a dispute over who owns this property. The deputy nodded. Who's the homeowner? Before I could answer, Dad stepped forward confidently. I am. Mom quickly added. This has always been our family estate. Brielle folded her arms, wearing a smug smile. I'm moving in today. The deputy looked at me. And your name? I introduced myself. Do you live here? Yes. How long? Almost 2 years. He nodded thoughtfully. Do you have identification with this address? I do. I handed him my driver's license. He studied it carefully, then looked back at my parents. Do either of you currently live here? Dad hesitated. No, but... Have you ever lived here? No. The deputy's expression became more serious. So you don't reside here? Mom quickly interrupted. That's not the point. Our daughter owes this family. The deputy remained calm. Ma'am, that's a family disagreement. My concern is legal ownership. Dad reached into the yellow envelope. Exactly. We have paperwork. He proudly handed over several documents. The deputy carefully examined every page. At first, no one spoke. My parents watched him with complete confidence. Brielle smiled as though she'd already won. Nearly a minute passed. Then the deputy looked up. Where did you get these? Dad frowned. What do you mean? These papers. Dad shrugged. They prove we're entitled to the house. The deputy flipped through them again. No, they don't. Mom's smile slowly faded. What? The deputy pointed to one page. This isn't a deed. He lifted another. This is a property valuation. Another page. This is a mortgage estimate. Then another. This is a real estate advertisement from before the home was sold. He looked directly at my father. None of these documents establish ownership. The confidence vanished from all 3 of their faces. Dad cleared his throat. There should be another paper. The deputy continued searching. There isn't. Mom looked confused. There has to be. The deputy handed the stack back. I'm sorry. These documents don't give you any legal rights to this property. Brielle stepped forward angrily. But they bought me furniture. I already ended my lease. They promised this house was mine. The deputy spoke gently. They may have promised you, but promises don't override property law. Dad suddenly raised his voice. This is ridiculous. We're her parents. We sacrificed everything to raise her. The deputy remained completely unfazed. I'm sure that's meaningful to your family, but it doesn't change legal ownership. He turned toward me. Do you have proof that you own the property? I nodded. I have my ID, mortgage documents, homeowner's insurance, and the closing paperwork. They're inside. May I retrieve them? Of course. I walked inside while everyone waited on the driveway. My hands were shaky. Not from fear, but from disbelief. How had my own parents convinced themselves they could simply take my home? A few minutes later, I returned carrying a large binder. Every important document had been organized the day I bought the house. The deputy carefully reviewed each page. The purchase agreement, the notarized deed, the county recording stamp, the mortgage documents, property tax receipts, homeowner's insurance. Everything matched perfectly. Finally, he closed the binder and looked directly at my father. Then he spoke the words that changed everything. Actually, sir, the county records say this property belongs solely to your daughter. A heavy silence settled over the driveway. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. Dad's face turned pale. Mom looked as though the ground had disappeared beneath her. Betrayal whispered. No, that's impossible. The deputy continued. She is the sole legal owner. She has the exclusive right to decide who enters this property. He turned toward the movers. You made the correct decision by stopping. Then he looked back at my parents. If you remain here against the owner's wishes, you may be cited for trespassing. For the first time that day, my parents looked nervous. But instead of apologizing, Dad's eyes narrowed. He slowly smiled. If paperwork won't work, then we'll handle this another way. I felt a chill run down my spine. Something told me this nightmare was far from over. Dad's smile sent a chill down my spine. If paperwork won't work, he said quietly, then we'll handle this another way. The deputy immediately stepped between us. Sir, I strongly advise you to think carefully about your next move. Dad ignored him and turned to me. You think you're better than us because you have money? I shook my head. No. I just expect my property rights to be respected. Mom suddenly burst into tears. Loud, dramatic sobs echoed across the driveway. I can't believe our own daughter is throwing us out. The crying was so convincing that a few neighbors began stepping outside to watch. Within minutes, several people had gathered along the sidewalk. Mom noticed the audience immediately. She cried even harder. We sacrificed our whole lives for her. Now she's making us homeless. The neighbors exchanged confused looks. Before anyone could say a word, I calmly opened my phone. I think everyone deserves to hear the whole story. I opened the family group chat. There were dozens of messages from the past 2 months. I handed my phone to the deputy first. His eyebrows slowly rose as he read. Then he looked at my parents. Did you send these messages? Dad didn't answer. The deputy read one message aloud. Once Betrayal moves in, you'll have to find another place. It's only fair. Another message from Mom read. You don't need such a big house. Family comes first. Then came one from Betrayal herself. I've already picked my bedroom. Can't wait. Several neighbors exchanged shocked glances. An elderly woman from across the street whispered. They planned this. The deputy continued scrolling. Another message appeared from Dad. Whether she agrees or not, she'll eventually give in. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom's tears stopped almost instantly. The performance was over. The deputy looked at me. Do you have anything else? I do. I walked back into the house and returned with a small folder. These are copies of every bank transfer I made for the purchase. The down payment, the mortgage payments, the property taxes, the homeowner's insurance. I've paid every dollar myself. The deputy examined the documents carefully. Everything matched. Every payment came from my personal account. No money had ever come from my parents. He looked directly at my father. So when you said, after everything we helped with, what exactly did you mean? Dad couldn't answer. Mom looked down at the ground. Betrayal stared silently at the driveway. Then from the crowd, my next-door neighbor, Mr. Harrison, stepped forward. I've lived beside her since the day she moved in. He looked at the deputy. I watched contractors renovate this house. I watched furniture deliveries. I watched her mow the lawn herself. I've never once seen these people here. Another neighbor nodded. She's one of the best neighbors we've ever had. Always respectful. always pays for everything herself. The deputy closed the folder. I've heard enough. He turned to my parents. I'm issuing you a formal trespass warning. If you return without the homeowner's permission, you may be arrested. Brielle's face turned white. Arrested? For coming to my own sister's house? The deputy answered calmly. It isn't your house. Dad clenched his fists. This isn't over. He pointed a finger at me. You'll regret humiliating your own family. I looked him straight in the eye. No. You humiliated yourselves the moment you tried to steal what wasn't yours. The deputy gestured toward their SUV. It's time for you to leave. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then the movers quietly began loading Brielle's furniture back onto the truck. One by one. The boxes disappeared. The bed disappeared. The dining table disappeared. The dream of taking my home disappeared with them. As my parents drove away, Mom looked back through the passenger window. There was no anger in her eyes anymore. Only something far more dangerous. Determination. I had won the battle. But deep down, I knew the war wasn't over. For 2 weeks after the incident, my house was quiet again. I changed every lock. Installed a new security system. Added cameras covering every entrance. For the first time since buying a house, I felt safe. Then, one Monday morning, a process server knocked on my front door. You've been served. Inside the envelope was a lawsuit. My parents were suing me. Their claim? That I had verbally promised to transfer the house to Brielle and had caused her emotional distress by refusing. I read the complaint twice, hardly believing what I was seeing. There wasn't a single piece of evidence attached. No contract. No witness. No signed agreement. Just accusations. My attorney, Sarah Collins, smiled the moment she finished reading it. This case won't survive, she said. But we need to respond properly. A month later, we were sitting in a county courtroom. My parents sat on one side with Brielle and their attorney. I sat beside Sarah, feeling calm for the first time in weeks. When the hearing began, my parents' lawyer stood. Your Honor, my clients were led to believe this property would remain available for family use. The judge adjusted his glasses. Do you have a written agreement? No, Your Honor. A text message? No. An email? No. The judge looked puzzled. So your entire claim is based on an alleged verbal promise? Yes. Sarah stood confidently. Your Honor, we have extensive documentation proving my client is the sole purchaser, sole borrower, sole taxpayer, and sole owner of this property. She handed the clerk a thick binder. Inside were the signed purchase contract, the recorded property deed, bank records showing the $250,000 down payment from my account, every mortgage payment, property tax receipts, homeowners' insurance records, security camera footage from the day they attempted to move into the house, copies of the family group chat messages discussing their plan. The judge spent several minutes reviewing the evidence. Then he looked toward my parents. Did you attempt to move furniture into this residence without the owner's permission? Dad hesitated. Yes. Did law enforcement respond? Yes. Were you informed that the property legally belonged to your daughter? Yes. The courtroom became silent. The judge sighed. This lawsuit appears entirely without merit. Before he could continue, Sarah stood again. Your Honor, we also have additional evidence. She pressed a button on her laptop. The courtroom speakers came alive. It was a voicemail. Dad's voice echoed through the room. Once we pressure her enough, she'll cave. She always does. Another recording followed. Mom's voice. If we make enough people think she's abandoning her family, she'll have no choice. The judge's expression hardened. He looked directly at my parents. Did either of you leave these messages? Neither answered. That is a yes. Then came the biggest surprise of the day. Sarah requested permission to call one final witness. The courtroom doors opened. The sheriff's deputy who had responded that day walked inside in full uniform. He took the witness stand, raised his right hand, and swore to tell the truth. The judge asked, Deputy, based on your investigation that day, who was the lawful owner of the property? Without hesitation, he replied, the defendant, the daughter. County records, mortgage documents, tax records, and identification all confirmed she was the sole legal owner. Her parents had no ownership interest whatsoever. The judge nodded slowly. Then he turned toward my parents. I have heard enough. He picked up his gavel. Everyone in the courtroom held their breath, waiting to hear his final decision. The courtroom was so quiet that the sound of the judge placing his glasses on the bench echoed through the room. Everyone waited. My parents stared at the judge, hoping for a miracle. Brielle nervously twisted her hands together. The judge looked down at the evidence one final time before speaking. After reviewing the documents, testimony, electronic messages, recordings, and witness statements, this court finds that the defendant is the sole legal owner of the property. He paused. There is absolutely no evidence that she ever agreed to transfer ownership of this home. He turned toward my parents. Instead, the evidence clearly shows that you knowingly attempted to pressure, manipulate, and intimidate your daughter into surrendering property that legally belonged to her. The courtroom remained silent. This lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. Dad's shoulders dropped. That meant they could never file the same claim again. But the judge wasn't finished. He looked towards Sarah, my attorney. Counsel, I understand you have filed a motion requesting attorney's fees. Yes, Your Honor. The judge nodded. Granted. My parents would now have to reimburse every dollar of my legal expenses. Mom covered her face with both hands. Brielle whispered. Mom, what do we do now? No one answered. The judge continued. Furthermore, based on the recordings presented to this court and the testimony of the responding deputy, I am issuing a civil protection order. He looked directly at my parents. For the next 5 years, neither of you may enter the defendant's property or contact her for the purpose of harassing, threatening, or attempting to obtain ownership of her residence. Dad stood up in disbelief. This is unfair. The judge calmly replied. No, sir. What was unfair was attempting to take someone else's home. He struck the gavel. This case is concluded. Outside the courthouse, reporters had gathered after hearing about the unusual family dispute. One journalist approached me. Do you have anything you'd like to say? I thought for a moment before answering. I never wanted to fight my family. I only wanted to protect what I earned. I hope this reminds people that love should never be confused with entitlement. Next morning, the story spread across local news and social media. Most people were shocked that parents had tried to move one daughter into another daughter's home without permission. Supportive messages poured in from strangers. Many shared stories of setting healthy boundaries with relatives who believed family entitled them to someone else's success. A week later, I returned home after work. The evening sun lit up the front of my house just as it had on the day I first bought it. For the first time in months, I smiled. Not because I had won in court, but because I had finally learned something far more valuable. Being someone's family does not give them ownership over your life, your choices, or your achievements. Real family celebrates your success. They don't try to steal it. I walked inside, locked the front door, and looked around the home I had built through years of sacrifice. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a symbol of self-respect, hard work, and the courage to stand up, even when the people standing against you shared your last name. And from that day forward, no one ever tried to take it away again.